Hello, my dear students. Once again, it has been a great pleasure for me to meet you in this allied paper Shakespeare, for which I have already uploaded an introductory video for William Shakespeare. So, for this video lesson, I would like to discuss Act 1 from the famous tragedy Macbeth, which is prescribed to you in Unit 1 of this paper. So, let us get into this video lesson with the following objectives first. Number 1, we have to start with the background. Number 2, major characters. Number 3, scene divisions. Number 4, exposition of the play. And number 5, analysis. In this analysis section, we can have deeper discussions on each and every scene present in Act 1. That is, in Act 1, we have 7 scenes for which I have given a detailed analysis. Followed by the analysis, we also have questions in the end of the discussion. And finally, I have also given the links for references and for further study. I also request all the students to join the Google Classroom by just making note of the link given in the end of the slide. That is the Google Classroom code. So let us get into Act 1 of the famous tragedy by William Shakespeare, Macbeth. Okay, let's get into the background of Act 1 first. The play Macbeth, as we have discussed earlier, is one among the 4 major tragedies of Shakespeare. So, Macbeth is always quoted as a very famous classical example of Shakespearean tragedy. So, for the background or the setting, we have to understand in which backdrop the story takes place. So then only we can understand the story better. So the story of Macbeth takes place in Scotland, and in the opening scene itself, Scotland was in war against Ireland and Norway. As far as Ireland was concerned, the war was led by a rebel named Macdonald, and in the case of Norway, the Thane of Cawdor, who belongs to Scotland himself, he turned into a traitor and he joined hands with the Norwegian forces and took part in the war against Scotland. So Scotland is war against 2 countries, Ireland and Norway. Duncan was the king of Scotland and he was camping outside in a little town called Forres, outside in the outskirts of Scotland. It is around 90 miles away from the capital. And Macbeth and Banquo, they were the 2 great generals of Duncan. They were leading the fight. And King Duncan was awaiting the news about or updates about the battle. This is the background of the play. And now we have number 2, the major characters. As far as dramatis personae are concerned, first we have Duncan, the king of Scotland. Malcolm and Donalbain were his 2 sons. And we have Macbeth, of course, the central character or the hero of the play. And we have another general named Banquo, who is a very good friend of Macbeth himself. And we have Macduff, Lennox, Ross, Menteith, Angus, Caithness, and Caithness, all these fellows are noblemen of Scotland. They were also very good friends of the king. We also have Fleance, Banquo's son. We have Seward, who is the Earl of Northumberland. He is the general of the English army. We have young Seward, his own son. And we have Satan, an officer attending on Macbeth. Boy, son of Macduff, an English doctor. We have also characters like a Scotch doctor, a captain, a porter, an old man, and most importantly, Lady Macbeth, Lady Macduff, gentlewomen attending on Lady Macbeth, Hecate, the three witches, and lords, gentlemen, officers, soldiers, murderers, attendants, and so on. So these were the major characters in the play. And next, we move on with the locations of the 7 scenes that are comprising in Act 1. The locations vary from a desert, a heath, and then moves to a camp near forest. Again, it comes to the heath. In scene 4, it moves to the forest, the palace. Number 5, the castle of Inverness, which is the residence of Macbeth. In scene 6, it happens in Macbeth's castle, and scene 7 also takes place in Macbeth's castle itself. So in Act 1, scene 1, the scene opens in a heath, a desert place. Heath may also refer to an uncultivated piece of land, a barren piece of land. It is totally unfertile, which is unfit for any cultivation. In such a place, the play opens. Look at the opening scene. There is thunder, rain, and lightning as a backdrop. The play opens with such a turbulent backdrop of thunder, rain, and lightning. And to add to its effect, 3 witches enter the scene with beards like men. They are women, witches, but they appear like men with beards. The time of meeting, the 3 witches discuss about the time to meet. They wanted to meet before sunset, and they fix the place as the heath, that is the barren land, and this is the meeting point or rendezvous fixed by the 3 witches. In this scene, there is an important dialogue spoken by the witches which has greater prominence. That is, the witches say, "Fair is foul and foul is fair, over through the fog and filthy air." Look at the line first, line 1, that is, fair is foul and foul is fair. This hint in scene 1 actually goes on throughout the action of the play. Whatever appears to be fair for the witches is foul for moral people or for normal people, and what appears to be foul for the witches is actually fair for normal people, that is vice versa. So the witches considered something to be fair, but it is actually a foul thing, but whatever they consider to be foul is fair for the normal human beings. It can be also taken as a confession of the witches, that is, what appears fair for the witches are foul to us and vice versa. So this is the major dialogue found in scene 1. Now we move on to the exposition part in Act 1. That is, I am discussing about the opening scene. How the play opens is called as an exposition. How it exposes, that is called exposition. The play opens in a heath, I told you, in the backdrop of thunder, rain, and lightning. This kind of setting also sets the mood of the play. That is, it gives a hint to the readers or the audience about what kind of play the audience are going to witness, or what kind of scenes we are going to encounter in the course of action. That is, slowly, gradually, we are going to witness more and more violent scenes in the course of action. We also witnessed the entry of witches, and these witches, they also possessed beards like men, but they are females. And we also get a sense of evil, something wrong about the opening scene itself. The play is dealing with something evil. That is the hint we get during the opening scene itself. And we also discussed about the word play in the dialogue of fair and foul. Now, in scene 2, from the heath, the scene shifts to a place called Forres, Forres. And here we have Duncan, his 2 sons Malcolm and Donalbain, Lennox with attendants. A bleeding sergeant enters and describes the event. He is the messenger who brings news about what happened in the battlefield. Through the report given by the sergeant, we come to know about the courageous fight of Macbeth and Banquo, especially Macbeth. You just look at the lines here. For brave Macbeth, well he deserves that name. Disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution. Look at the exaggeration. Look at the exaggeration given by Shakespeare. The steel, that is the blade of the sword, started smoking because of the speed in which Macbeth moves his sword. And when the blood gets smeared on the steel, smoke started appearing. That is, which smoked with bloody execution. Look at the beautiful description given by Shakespeare about the speed in which Macbeth moved his blades while cutting the bodies of his enemies. And he says, like Valord's minion carved out his passage, he was just moving like a deadly weapon till he faced the slave which never shook hands nor bade farewell to him. That is, he refers to the Thane of Cawdor who turned out to be a traitor, till he unseamed him from the nape to the chaps. His body was cut, ripped open, exactly in the middle. He rips open the body of the traitor, and his head was removed and was placed upon the battlements. Such deadly violence can be seen from the report of the sergeant given to the King Duncan. So the sergeant says, after a great struggle by both Macbeth and Banquo, Scotland emerged victorious in the fight. Sweno, the king of Norway, surrendered and offers a ransom of $10,000 to take away the wounded soldiers and the dead bodies from his side. Duncan was very much happy and pleased and gives an orders to execute the traitor, the Thane of Cawdor. Ross and Angus, the two messengers, are sent by Duncan to meet and greet Macbeth with their new title. That is, Duncan has given a promotion to Macbeth as the new Thane of Cawdor after executing the existing Thane of Cawdor. Macbeth and Banquo are returning to Forres to meet Duncan. In scene 3, now again the scene shifts to the heath where the three witches again appear. One of the witches says that she is busy killing swine, which is considered to be a very evil thing, and another witch describes how she has been planning to take a revenge upon a sailor's wife who has refused to give chestnuts. So, from this scene, we can understand the character of the witches, how vulnerable, how cruel these witches are. And these witches, as planned earlier, before sunset, they meet Macbeth and Banquo while returning back to Forres. The witches started greeting Macbeth in a unified voice, "All hail Macbeth, the Thane of Glamis." Macbeth was already possessing the title called Thane of Glamis, so there is no wonder in greeting him with the title Thane of Glamis. Again, the three witches in unison started greeting Macbeth as "Hail Macbeth, the Thane of Cawdor." Macbeth was totally stunned and stupefied, and he couldn't understand why these witches have been greeting him with a new title of Thane of Cawdor. He simply can't understand that. Again, the three witches in unison they say that, "Hail Macbeth, the future King of Scotland." The third prophecy totally disturbs Macbeth, and he felt totally stunned because in the deeper mind or a deeper unconscious mind of Macbeth, he has been always eyeing upon the throne of Scotland. So the three witches greeted him with as the Thane of Glamis, the Thane of Cawdor, and the future King of Scotland. When they started greeting Macbeth alone, Banquo also becomes curious, and when he asks for any prophecy for him, they say that, lesser than Macbeth and greater. It is a paradox. That is, he can never become the king of Scotland, but his children, that is, Banquo's children, will become the future king of Scotland. With this prophecies, the three witches disappear from the scene. And Banquo replies that the devils often tell half truths, and he gives a warning to Macbeth that they will try to win us to our harm and don't believe such words. Macbeth ignores the warning and speaks to himself. That is, in a soliloquy, he thinks and broods over the possibility that one day he may become the king of Scotland. Macbeth wonders how he is going to perform a dark deed in order to gain the crown. Because by normal means he cannot assume the kingship of Scotland since there are two legal heirs to the throne. That is, Malcolm and Donalbain are the two legal heirs of the King Duncan to the throne of Scotland. So only through some dark deeds Macbeth can claim the crownship of the King of Scotland. Macbeth gives a whisper to Banquo that he can discuss the idea later in a private manner and not to be discussed right now. Now, in scene 4, the scene shifts to the king's palace, that is near Forres. King Duncan says about the Thane of Cawdor. Here, look at the lines here. There is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. He actually refers to the Thane of Cawdor, the traitor, who turned out to be a traitor, who was actually a good friend of King Duncan. But now he turned out to be a traitor and he joined with the Norwegian forces and eventually he was killed. And King Duncan was making a reference to the the Thane of Cawdor who has become a traitor. There is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. But this reference actually is very much applicable to Macbeth also, who has been hiding his cunning intentions with a smiling face in an outward way. Macbeth and Banquo enter with Ros and Angus, the messengers. Duncan thanks and praises the two generals for their heroic acts of bringing victory to Scotland, and Duncan happily announces his decision to make his elder son Malcolm the heir to his throne, and he declares him as the Prince of Cumberland. He gives a promotion to Malcolm as the Prince of Cumberland, which gives a hint to Macbeth that Malcolm is soon going to assume the throne of Scotland as the legal heir. When this announcement is made by King Duncan, Macbeth gets shocked. But he couldn't show that. In front of the king, how can he express his evil desire? He simply speaks to himself again, but he suppresses all his cunning desires, and he throws out an open invitation to Duncan to dine as his guest in his castle of Inverness. Castle of Inverness is the residing place of Macbeth, and Macbeth wants to leave the place immediately. Since he could not hide his emotions in the face, he just takes leave from the party, and on the pretext of saying that he has to make some arrangements for the oncoming dinner for the royalty. Before leaving, Macbeth uses a messenger to send a letter to Lady Macbeth. So now Macbeth has to make a decision, and that is, Malcolm is soon going to become the legal heir of Scotland. In the scene 4, there is the most important aside is spoken by Macbeth is, the Prince of Cumberland, that is a step on which I must fall down or else overleap. For in my way it lies. That is, in this aside, which is not meant to be heard by the other characters, he speaks in a low voice. He says that this is the point where he must fall down or else he must overleap. He must overleap the obstacle of Malcolm. So he requests the stars, he makes a prayer to the stars to hide their fires. Let not light see my black and deep desires. The eye wink at the hand, yet let that be which the eye fears when it is done to see. Look at the paradox that is the inner conflict in the mind of Macbeth. Macbeth wants to commit a dark action, that is the murder of King Duncan, but he doesn't want the heaven, the stars refer to God and heaven. He doesn't want the God to take note of his evil action of murder. He wants the crownship, at the same time, he doesn't want his hands to be dirty. That is, he doesn't want to invoke the wrath of the king, that is the God. Sorry. The eye wink at the hand. Let the eye refuses to see what the hand is doing. It seems as if Macbeth already feels stabbing the king and wished to close his eyes to avoid seeing it. Now, in scene 5, the scene shifts to the castle of Inverness, which is none other than Macbeth's own castle, where Macbeth and Lady Macbeth reside. Lady Macbeth receives a letter from Macbeth, and it reveals Macbeth's promotion as the new Thane of Cawdor and his meeting with the witches. Lady Macbeth feels that she knows Macbeth is ambitious. That is, Lady Macbeth is very much aware that already Macbeth is having an intention to capture the kingship of Scotland. But she says, but he fears he is too full of milk of human kindness. From the words of Lady Macbeth, we can understand the character of Macbeth. Macbeth is an ambitious man. At the same time, he is filled with the milk of human kindness. Look at the ambiguity in his character. He is ambitious, over ambitious, to admit. At the same time, he is filled with human kindness. This paradox invokes pity and fear. That is a true classical element in Shakespearean tragedy. And she says, he is too kind to take bold steps to make himself the King of Scotland. Because in order to become the King of Scotland, Macbeth has to take some serious action. And Lady Macbeth resolves to herself that she is going to convince her husband to do the deed, that is the assassination of the king. A messenger informs the king's arrival and she gets ready to welcome the king. Scene 5 continues. Lady Macbeth here delivers a famous speech. Look at the lines here. You spirits that tend on mortal thoughts, unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe, top full of direst cruelty. See how bitter Lady Macbeth has become in order to crave for power. She resolves to put aside her natural femininity, the kindness in natural femininity, the love, the caring nature of the human nature of the human femininity, to involve the evil deeds of that is necessary to capture the power. She becomes power hungry. She was craving for power and she is ready to do anything to capture power. She wants to become the Queen of Scotland. So, in this aspect, we find both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth to be an ideal couple. That is, they share the both same intentions to capture the crownship of Scotland. Macbeth discusses the king's visit, and Macbeth tells Duncan plans to depart the next day itself, but Lady Macbeth declares that the king is never going to see the daybreak. And she tells her husband he had to leave the plan to her and she is going to make all the plans. And he need not worry at all. Now we move on to scene 6. That is again in Macbeth's castle. Duncan arrives with his attendants. Duncan praises the castle's pleasant environment in a very ironic way. He praises the castle of Inverness to be a very pleasant place. And he thanks Lady Macbeth for her hospitality, for extending a very warm welcome to him. She replies in turn that it is her duty to extend the hospitality, and since she and Macbeth owe so much to him that is, he has done so much for them. He has given promotion, he has given so much of praise to Macbeth, and she feels that it is a moral obligation of both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth to extend such hospitality to King Duncan. Now King Duncan moves inside to meet Macbeth, but still Macbeth is not seen in the entrance. We might have noted that in the forest itself, Macbeth takes leave from the party, saying that he has to go back to his castle to make some prior arrangements to welcome the king. But here we notice only Lady Macbeth alone is receiving the king. Now, as students, you just have a look at the dramatic irony here. Duncan, without knowing what is going to happen to him in the castle, he says, "This castle has a pleasant seat. The air nimbly and sweetly recommends itself unto our gentle senses." Ironically, he calls the castle of Inverness to be a gentle place, without knowing that he is going to be murdered in the same castle. Banquo, for his turn, he also adds up. He says, "This guest of summer, the temple haunting martlet, does approve by his loved masonry." That is, he makes a reference to a small singing bird like martlet having built upon a nest in the castle of Inverness. This is a sign noticed by Banquo that if a bird like martlet builds a nest, that means the castle of Inverness is so sweet, is so peaceful, so that the bird itself has built up a nest. So both Banquo and Duncan forget to realize that there is going to be an evil action, that is the murder of King Duncan is going to take place in the same castle of Inverness. Both these fellows forget to notice the absence of Macbeth. Macbeth, who was supposed to receive the king in the entrance, was not present. Only Lady Macbeth was there to receive the king, and Macbeth is nowhere to be found. In the castle of Inverness, in scene 7, Macbeth broods over the idea of assassinating King Duncan. He wants the deed to be done, but at the same time, he doesn't want to face any serious consequences. Look at the duality or ambiguity in the character of Macbeth. Macbeth wants to commit a murder, but at the same time, he doesn't want to invoke the wrath of God. Because killing the king is an act of regicide, Regicide. Killing a king or assassinating a king is one among a very serious sin, an unpardonable sin. So he is very much aware that he is going to be eternally damned for that sin. So he is willing to risk eternal damnation, but realizes that eventually there would be punishment for his actions. He analyzes the reasons why he should not kill Duncan. He lists out 4 important reasons. First 3 are more important. Macbeth is none other than King Duncan's own cousin. He is his close relative of King Duncan, number 1. Number 2, he is a faithful citizen of the king. Macbeth is a general of King Duncan's army. So he is not supposed to kill the king, but he has to protect the king actually. And number 3, King Duncan has come as a guest to his place of residence. And Macbeth is a host who is supposed to extend his hospitality and not murdering him. These important 3 reasons prevent Macbeth to commit the act of murder. He is not supposed to kill the king, but he is supposed to protect him. Macbeth is King Duncan's cousin. Macbeth is the faithful citizen of the king. Macbeth is the host of King Duncan, who is supposed to receive him in a hospitable way. Moreover, Macbeth cannot justify his act of committing the murder because King Duncan is really a virtuous ruler, a very kind hearted person, a morally upright person. He is not a traitor, he is a good natured man, he is very kind, and he is a very able administrator. So, for these reasons, Macbeth can never commit the act of murder. That is what the inner conflict that is going on in the mind of Macbeth says. But when he expresses these things to Lady Macbeth loses her temper and bursts out. She is totally outraged. She calls him a coward and hurts his ego by questioning his manliness. The breaking point of any man is by the wife herself by questioning his manliness. No man will ever bear this kind of charge that being questioned by his own wife, that is, his manliness is put at stake. This breaks Macbeth totally. Macbeth is totally shattered by these words because Lady Macbeth questions his manliness. These words of Lady Macbeth attains greater significance because they do not have children so far. Being childless, when Lady Macbeth utters these words, Macbeth gets totally shattered and he decides to commit the act of murder. Macbeth's inner struggle can be seen in his own voice. He says, so clear in his great office, there are no charges against the king. He is so clear in his great office that his virtues will plead like angels, a technique of personification. The virtues of the King Duncan will plead for him not to commit the murder, and the trumpet tongued against the deep damnation of his taking off, that is, the act of murder. And again, another personification, pity will come like a naked newborn baby, stirring the blast, and heaven's cherubim horsed upon the sightless couriers of air. Macbeth is very much aware that if he commits the sin of committing the murder, definitely God's angels will punish him. He is very much sure about it. Look at the words of Lady Macbeth as a contrast here. Would you have that which you esteemed the ornament of life? That is courage. Do you have it in you? Do you have the courage? Do you have the bravery? And she says, letting I dare not wait upon, I would, like the poor cat in the adage. She makes a comparison with Macbeth to a cat who wants to catch a fish at the same time doesn't want to get wet. Is it possible? If the cat wants to catch the fish, it has to get into the water. There is no other choice. But Macbeth acts and behaves as if like a cat who wants to catch the fish at the same time he doesn't want to get wet. So she says, if you want to become the king of Scotland, you have to commit the act of murder. There is no other choice. Just do it. So in scene 7, it continues. She reveals her plan to kill Duncan in sleep. She plans to make the attendants, the chamberlains of the king, fully drunk with wine. She will feed them excessively with wine and they will become unconscious. Macbeth can easily slip into his room and murder King Duncan. After murdering him, Macbeth can smear the blood of Duncan on the sleeping chamberlains as if someone comes and notices, the blame can be easily put on the chamberlains that they have accidentally, in a drunken mood, murdered the king themselves. So Macbeth was extremely happy and praises his wife's courage and intelligence, that her undaunted mettle, the courage, makes him hope that she will give only birth to male children alone. So, male children are usually associated with courage, that is in the Elizabethan context. Macbeth then agrees to proceed with the murder. Already I told you, Macbeth was totally shattered. His ego was totally shattered by Lady Macbeth by questioning his manliness. He has no other choice and he has to commit the murder. Now, in this scene, we have to make a note of the character of Lady Macbeth. Look at the cruel nature of the Lady Macbeth. You just look at the lines and tell me whether any woman or any mother would do such an act to her own baby. Look at the lines here. I have given suck, and I know how tender it is to love the baby that milks me. A baby is feeding the mother. I would, while it was smiling in my face, have plucked my nipple from his boneless gums and dashed the brains out, had I so sworn as you have done to this. How cruel Lady Macbeth is. Thank God she is not blessed with a baby at all. She says, if she has a baby, and while it was sucking milk from her breast, and while it was smiling in her face, she would pluck the baby from her nipples and she would dash the brains out of the baby by dashing it against the walls. Would a mother will ever do that? Is it possible? It's practically unimaginable for a mother to do such an action. Such a horrible character is Lady Macbeth. In order to capture power, she is ready to go to any extent. These are the exact lines which reveal the real face of Lady Macbeth. So, we have come to the end of the presentation. So, I have given you some 7 questions to ponder over, and these questions can be taken up as a part of your assignment, and please refer some reading materials. I have also given some web links in the description box of this channel. Go through the web links, make references, and just think about these questions and try to find answers for these questions. For further reading, as I told you, I have given description. In the description section, I have given web links. Kindly go through it, and don't forget to join the Google Classroom with this class code. Hope you enjoyed this session of Act 1 of Macbeth. So soon we would meet again in Act 2 of Macbeth. Take care. Stay safe.